but that doesn't, oh my gosh. I don't know if I like it. I think we got a winner here and I'm really pumped about it. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Leandra the TBR0 and my goal is to listen to my physical TBR one book at a time. This is the third episode in my Meet the Booktuber through book series. If you're new here and you have no idea what I'm talking about, basically I ask a fellow booktuber to recommend me 3 books that represents their reading repertoire. So what genres are they most known for? What are some really excellent books that they've adored that just represents them, their content, and their interests? This is my most nerve-wracking one. It definitely goes outside of my comfort zone, and that's because my third guest is Lauren from Happy Haunts Library. She is honestly, in my opinion, the expert of all things horror, and that's not just for books, it also is for film, and really just the horror industry. I really love consuming her content because she's very accessible. I feel as though veterans of the horror genre would love her, as well as beginners who just don't know where to go, and that represents me. This year in 2024, I definitely want to read more horror, so this is perfect for me. And I'm not gonna lie, I've been given some really interesting recommendations that I would never have picked up if Lauren hadn't recommended them to me. If you're interested in learning more about Lauren beyond the 3 books I'm gonna read, obviously you should go check out her channel. She's going to be linked below, and you should just subscribe because she's amazing. She has a really great eclectic example of various kind of content on her channel too. On Lauren's channel, you're going to find an amazing variety of content, including vlogs. She has done a vlog on her weekend in Las Vegas. I have been seeing mentions throughout social media that she has a vlog coming about her time in Salem, which I'm really looking forward to, and I'm wondering if it'll be posted by the time this video comes out. We'll see how it goes. And on top of that, she does a lot of great recommendation lists, whether it be for a certain holiday or for a certain trope. There's one that's this grand master list of recommendations of all things Frankenstein. And speaking of Frankenstein, if I have organized things correctly, this video should be coming out the 24th of March on a Sunday, and at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, potentially right after this video goes live itself, there will be a live chat on Happy Haunts Library where Lauren talks about all things Frankenstein. So it's going to be perfect. It's for her retroactive horror club, and I'm really looking forward to it. And it's going to be a great way for you to get to know her in person, live on screen. And I think that if this ends up exciting you in any way, you should definitely continue and go support her literally right away. But let's get to the 3 books that I've been recommended to read.
These 3 books that are huge all-time favorites of mine. They all happen to fall within the horror genre, but I don't think any one of these 3 books is going to be like quintessential horror. They are very unique and very distinctive, but I love them for their own specific reasons. Monstrilio is a very literary fiction book that falls within the subgenre of grief horror. I love this one because I felt like it really captured a lot of my processing over, a huge span of time when it came to experiencing the death and loss of people that I really hold really dear to my heart. I don't really feel like I found a lot of books that talk about grief decades after the passing of a person. It's always immediately right after. And I found this book to be very heartwarming, but also at the same time, I found it to be very bleak, very sad, as you would expect from this kind of subject matter, but incredibly impactful, where, a year later after reading this book, I still find it to be something that I think about often. Carmilla is going to be a classic. It is written by a man, which is very interesting when you actually read this book and you see that there is a lot of queer subtext here. We're talking mostly about women. So think about the author's position as they're writing this before actually Dracula was released. So this is a vampire story that we do have documentation that it inspired the work of Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula. So that's really cool to know about this story. And I loved it. The second I read it, I reread it, And then I listened to the audiobook and then found like 3 different Carmilla retellings because I'm just obsessed with the story so much. And then Goddess of Filth is really interesting because although I'm not like really into the possession genre within horror, I really found this to be super interesting because not only does it include possession horror, it also is talking about religion and its role in the lives of women, specifically women of color. And so it is kind of like this coming of age story. And I think this book will probably be the most graphic out of all the 3, but it's not like super intense or anything. Everything is just really meaningful and important and necessary in this work. And V. Castro, who was the author of Goddess of Filth, she also just has one of the most distinctive writing styles that I've ever come across. And it's like you could read her works without ever knowing she wrote it, and you just be like, yep, she wrote it for sure. This is her stuff. I really hope you enjoy these books, or at least learn a little bit more about the horror genre and what it consists of, because I think it gets a bad rap, especially on BookTube. I just know that it is a very diverse like space, and I just hope people really give it a shot without having like these assumptions that everything is always going to be like super suspenseful, super scary. There's so much you can do with horror, and I think that's what makes me love it so much.
The day has come where I start Monstrilio. I'm really excited. I'm also a bit nervous. I have the audio, so this is going to be an immersive reading experience, and while I don't know if this would be a horror novel I would immediately pick up, I could see myself appreciating a lot of the themes that I'm assuming are going to be in it. So let's see what happens. Wish me luck. I am a third of the way through Monstrilio, and I don't know if I like it. I am getting through it very quickly. I'm surprised that I'm already a third of the way through on this vlog. It has been less than 24 hours, and that does help that I have the audiobook. I am immersively reading it, but I have a lot of elements that I'm thoroughly enjoying, some that I would take or leave, and others that I'm just like, why did it have to go there? But I will say that Cordova is an excellent writer. I really like his descriptions, his imagery. There have been some discussions about language because we're working with characters who speak Spanish and English that I eat up. I love it. I don't know. This is probably the most unrelatable book that I've ever read in my life, and I anticipated that going into it, which may or may not have helped the situation because I didn't go in with high expectations. With Mago specifically, she is a mother who is grieving. Her and her husband have lost their son at this point. She has taken a piece of his lung, and she's actually traveled back to Mexico City, where she's from, and she's surrounded by family, some close friends, but it's strange that she went back because she's also very much resistant to them helping her in any way. She refuses to allow them to help her cope, to hold the grief that she's holding alone on her shoulders. But I can kind of understand where Cordova is going with that dynamic for this character, because if we're being honest, you may all have lost the same person, but you lost them in different ways. Grief weighs differently on our shoulders. It has a different shape, it has a different texture. So I appreciate the fact that Magos is refusing to share her grief because she's like, no, I'm alone in this. My relationship to Santiago is different than my relationship with any other character, even her husband's relationship to Santiago, her mother's relationship to her only grandson. All of them are extremely different, even if everyone means well and trying to support her. So that has been an interesting element, and that's not the only theme. While this is grief horror, we're seeing a lot of other elements, for instance, certain relational dynamics, how we give and receive love depending on who we're interacting with. There are mentions of religion, of folklore and legend. There's a lot to appreciate as far as how much Cordova is including in the narrative. The elements that I'm kind of not as interested in is the fact that as someone who doesn't have any interest in being a mother in any form, I just don't connect to these characters and their grief in the same way, and that may make me sound heartless, but at the same time, this is why I'm mooring. This is a really complex narrative because I think it's okay that I don't care, if that makes any sense. The way that Magos is holding her grief, it's an active grief, but it's also a reserved kind of quiet grief, and I like that. I feel as though it allows me to look at her character and not feel as though I'm being forced to try to empathize in a situation where I literally cannot understand what she's going through or who she's lost. So it's been really weird to reflect on that, because there are some mother narratives, I'll call them, that I really gravitate towards, but it has to be done in a certain way that allows those who aren't mothers or aren't interested in the mother role to understand. That's how I felt about Night Bitch, for instance, by Rachel Yoder. I think that one is a very heavy mother narrative, but I can relate to it, or at least appreciate what's going on, the issues that character is going on with her, I guess, visions of motherhood and what it's forced her to become. But back to Monstrilio. I don't like Magos though, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm okay with not liking her or not. In her POV, which we receive, I was totally cool with her being a great character. Her analysis of the situation, her choices were fine for me. But weirdly enough, now that we've switched POV to one of her close friends, I'm like, I really don't like you. I don't know why people like you. She also happens to have two people who are in love with her or who have been in love with her, and I'm just like, why? I don't understand why anyone would be in love with Magos, because she's really not a likable character. And yeah, it's been an interesting experience looking at someone being like, why is everyone obsessed with you? It doesn't make any sense. An element that I don't like, that I'm really mad that the author went there, is the harm and death towards domestic animals. There have been the killing of cats as of late in the most recent chapter, and I'm really mad that was included. It sounds really bad, but this creature that the lung is, growing up into, becoming, has been violent, and it doesn't really seem to have any understanding of morality or what it should or shouldn't do. It's like an unruly pet, in my opinion, and I'm really upset that it's harming these animals, and I actually don't care that it's harming people. Which is kind of a funny thing to reflect upon. But I do find it interesting that Magos is so protective of this thing, and it is showing her character through and through that she really doesn't care that it's putting other people that, would arguably on paper be labeled her loved ones in danger. She is willing to sacrifice them or let them feel a certain level of pain in order to keep this creature alive, this thing that she's just calling my lung. And she's also becoming much more animalistic herself. She is not hygienic. She's not organizing in her life. She's a bit more feral in her interactions too. Just, I don't know, maybe I'm getting that vibe. And her and this lung have more in common in a way compared to anyone else. So it's been a weird book. This has been a long update with only 1/3 of the book through. I'm trying to explain that I don't know how I feel. And I feel like that's probably actually a good place to be in. I'm compelled to see what happens, how this ends, but I suppose it's also a bad thing because the ending could be a deciding factor in how I feel. I could totally see why Lauren recommended this to me. This book is making me think in different ways, which is really fascinating. It's not a book I would have picked up on my own. So thank you, Lauren, for kind of pushing the envelope, making me try grief horror, something that I've only ever dipped my toes in and haven't really found a good grip on, and also a mother narrative that I'm working my way through, and it's just, very interesting. Yeah, so, okay, Lauren, you've got an interesting book here. Let's see what I think of it by the end. A couple days ago, I finished Monstrilio, and I have attempted to explain my thoughts about this book multiple times. There are many drafts of my recording here that you'll never see because I'm trying to get it right. And the reason for that is because I didn't like this book. I am currently debating if I want to give it a 1 or 2 stars, and I'm so sorry, Lauren. I really am. I'm especially sorry because I have an alternative. In a different world, this book was published in a different way, and I would have given it 4 stars. And that is a world in which this was a novella. It only followed Magos' perspective, the first 82 pages, and then we were done. And I would have given that 4 stars because I understood Magos' motivation, her interactions with this Monstrilio, and how it ended was quite satisfying. It felt final to me. And then Cordova, for some reason, kept going. And we got Lena's perspective, and then we got Joseph's perspective, and then we got Monstrilio's perspective. And I kept seeing more and more elements that I was uncomfortable with, and not in the discomfort that you like to see with horror, where it's pushing the boundaries, making you question things, pushing the narrative forward. Because a lot of the elements I had an issue with were superfluous, and they're not even spoilers. Like, I can tell you what I had a problem with about it, even if it was very far in the narrative, because if you took the scene out, it wouldn't have changed anything. So that's what I'm struggling to try to explain to all of you here. And I do want to start off by saying I recognize that this book is well loved. Most people who have rated it in various review sites have given it 4 or 5 stars. So I think that's also why I feel a bit more comfortable explaining in detail why I dislike this book, because I know I'm in the minority. So if you're someone who adored this, don't take offense to the fact that I really disliked it, but maybe just, if you're willing, open a willing ear and try to hear my perspective on this, because I'm really baffled. I genuinely want to understand why people haven't paused to wonder about some of the things that I'm reading, and I'm like, this is not right. Like, there are some lines that are being crossed that I just don't feel comfortable with, and I'm confused. The reason why I'm not really a huge fan of it is because the characters remained hollow, so that's a technical issue that I had. Each time we moved perspectives, the character that we just got to kind of thoroughly know was then pushed into the peripherals, and they kind of acted like a ghost, coming into scenes, giving some dialogue, and then just they all felt like caricatures that I never got to know very well. So I didn't understand their perspective. I didn't understand their infatuation with each other, with Monstrilio himself. And so that in itself is just like a very technical issue that I had as far as a writing style goes. With Lena, I was uncomfortable with having her written by a man. She's a lesbian who comes from a traumatic background. Her mother viewed her as a demon, said it outright, and everyone in the family just kind of accepted it, and Lena was forced to live in this household where her mother remained undiagnosed and untreated for what my understanding is a mental illness. And then into adulthood, she carries this trauma, and it kind of manifests in the need to be bathed by a woman. And it seems as though it's more of a motherly kind of situation. It does lend itself to sexual activity at times throughout the book, but she hires sex workers to bathe her and help her fall asleep at night. And I didn't like the fact that a man was writing this story for her. It kind of blurred the line of potential fetishizing this lesbian woman, and I don't know, I really didn't like it. And then we had Joseph, and I think Joseph's perspective was the one I had the biggest issue with, specifically because of one scene that did not need to be in there. It literally wouldn't have affected the narrative at all if Cordova didn't include it. So I'm wondering what his reasoning was. And this was a phone call that Joseph had with Monstrilio, his kind of son adjacent, right? Because Monstrilio isn't Santiago, but he did come from Santiago, from that piece of lung. And at this point, Santiago, or I should say Monstrilio, is a teen, and he is having his first sexual experience. He calls his father after, and I'm fine with that. I actually think it's very disconcerting when parents and children are uncomfortable talking about sex with each other, because that's where misinformation comes in, lack of education, ignorance, and just a lot more issues that I want to make sure that we address, and that parents should be ready and able to help their children through. But this became way too sexual and intimate as he was recollecting exactly what he did with this other boy to his father, especially the smells. He really emphasized the smell leading up to having sex. There was a lot of olfactory senses going on, and I was like, this is gross. Like, this is very gross. It makes me feel very icky to have him tell his father about this, especially what his father does afterwards, which is hang up the phone and then do exactly what his son did with his own partner. I did not like the parallelism going on there, and I was like, this is crossing a line. And then that brings me to Monstrilio, someone who we watch grow up in a fractured sense. This is a very fractured novel where we get a lot of gaps in time, and then suddenly characters are in different places at different points in their lives, and it's very disjointed in that way. But Monstrilio, for me, was always childlike. He always seemed like a child to me, always learning about the world, always very innocent. And I think that's where I felt very gross about him participating, not just in sexual encounters, but violent ones. It was very much an erotic violence kind of horror. And I was just like, I don't like this because Monstrilio always feels very infantile to me. There's a moment where he and his father are outside and he bends down to pick up a cigarette that has clearly been used and discarded and is full of germs and just grossness, and he's about to like try to smoke it, and his father's like, don't do that. It was on the ground. And I'm like, is your son 5 years old? Like, is Monstrilio just perpetually 5 years old in like an adult body? I just, oh gosh, it really frustrated me that he remained so infantile because it made everything feel really gross. I hope that some of these explanations allow you to understand where I'm coming from for why I'm going to be giving this book such a low rating. As I said, if Cordova just stopped at 82 pages, gave us Magos' perspective and the events that happened in those first 82 pages, this would have been a 4-star for me. But I cannot cope with the other events that went on that literally have nothing to do with the narrative, especially because by the end, then you're like, why did all of this happen? Like, what did we gain from this? So this isn't a great place to be in this vlog right now, but you know what? That's okay. This is meant to be a kind of learning experience, getting to know people and trying new things. So Lauren, I really do hope that you understand where I'm coming from, and I still really appreciate your attempt to give me this as a recommendation. I know that I think I'm probably a harder person to recommend for horror because I don't read it very often and I'm just kind of still getting into what I like and what I don't like. I think that this was recommended to me potentially because I like A Diary of Blood, and I did read that, I did appreciate that, and there are some kind of parallels to it, but yeah, this was a miss, unfortunately. So yeah, hopefully I have better luck in the other books that I have for this vlog. Good morning! I have officially started Carmilla. Last night I got to chapter 4, so I think I'm about 40 pages into this, and actually I'm very close to the end as it is because this is a very short classic work. It's only about 96 pages for my edition. That doesn't look like it. I also didn't realize how short it was when I first started it because there are a handful of essays at the back of the book by scholars, experts who obviously want to really delve into the nooks and crannies of analysis about this classic, and I get it. I won't be reading those because at this point I'm not going to be reading scholarly work unless I'm getting paid for it. So with this classic though, I'm pretty impressed by how palatable it is. The narrative is quite linear. I feel as though I'm not lost in the dialogue or the scenes being set up for us, which is very much a relief to me because I just don't tend to like reading classics of certain genres and by certain authors, of course, but especially if it's prior to the 20th century, that's when I get a bit apprehensive, a bit nervous about how slow the narrative is going to feel for me, just because the syntax doesn't really match very well with my modern perspective and like how I like to, I guess, digest my reading. But with this one, I am also reading it immersively with my audiobook. I got it through YouTube. That is one lovely tip that I think a lot of people don't realize, is that yes, Libby and Hoopla are amazing, but if you can't access some of these older works, you actually can usually find a few free versions on YouTube because they're in the public domain, because people are volunteering to read aloud these stories. And yeah, that's pretty much how I've been reading any classic that I've wanted to read in the last like year or two, and it's been very helpful for me to get through some of these books that I want to be able to say I've read but I am struggling with the syntax. So with Carmilla, we have a young woman protagonist. I also actually have to pause and go back to discussing the audiobook now that I'm thinking about it, because the one issue I'm having with the audiobook I have is that it is narrated by a man, and that really threw me for a loop because I kept questioning whether the main character was a woman or not, because it's written in first person. And again, I'm sure it's a volunteer work, or because it's part of the free domain, like anyone can just read it aloud. But it really annoyed me that I was like, why is this being read aloud to me by a man? I know it's written by a man, but that doesn't, oh my gosh, it took me so long to be able to separate the voice from the main character. And I did have to look up her name because I don't think it's mentioned anywhere, at least not yet, probably because it's first person, and why would someone reference their own name? Laura, she and her father live in a very secluded place. They are far away from any nearby village, any inhabitable village, and she is then susceptible to isolation. growing up without friends, and her father is very aware of that. And so he, tries to get other young women to come visit their home, to spend time with her, to help her cultivate her social skills and just have a good childhood. She did have this apparently kind of spooky experience back when she was a young child. A being, we're assuming it's a vampire, entered her bedroom, laid down with her, and then proceeded to attempt to feed on her. But then she shrieked, she screamed, people came running, and now she's kind of been watched for many, many years at this point, ensuring that she's never alone because of that fearful experience. Now, moving into present day for Laura and her family, there have been some strange occurrences. Women are dying. It seems as though they're falling into some type of fright, and then they just slowly diminish after that, and no one's really making connections to the various deaths. At the same time, Laura and her father have allowed a guest to come to stay with them, and it's this woman who ended up being in this horrific, I guess, carriage crash. I'm not really sure how it worked. To my understanding, the carriage tipped over and she was injured, she was hurt, she was in shock, and her mother, for some reason, was like, I have to keep traveling, but I don't know what to do with my daughter. And so Laura and her father are like, she can stay with us for a little while. And the mom's like, perfect, bye. And so now this young woman that we learn is Carmilla, who's also very secretive. Like, we aren't getting much information about her besides her name and a few other important details. Carmilla is staying with Laura and her father, and the two young women are getting very close. I was surprised to realize, and I'm sure that this was in like the premise, a lot of people who are discussing this work, maybe Lauren even mentioned this to me, and now I'm just completely surprised by it, but I didn't realize that this was a sapphic vampire like story, because I was like, are these two ladies like into each other? I was totally for it, but I was like, am I reading into this? Is this just lady friends of the time, and this author's just stupid and doesn't realize that gay people exist? Yeah, this is a sapphic vampire like origin story, and I love that. I love the fact that this predates Dracula, and on top of that, it follows these like women characters who have this like love and infatuation, and just, I don't know, I'm into it. So I really appreciate all of those elements because of how old it is, and it just, I don't know, it's very satisfying to know that. I'm pleasantly surprised that this book isn't as much of a struggle as I thought it was going to be, so that's really good. I may or may not give another update. We're gonna see how it goes, but like I said, I really don't have much more to go, maybe 50 pages, so I may end up just seeing you at the end of this. I just finished Carmilla, and honestly, it has been about an hour and a half since I last updated you. I told you it was a quick narrative, and honestly, I can definitely agree with Lauren in probably assuming that this is a very accessible classic. So if people who aren't sure if they're interested in classics, or they're kind of delving into Gothic horror, this is a very good place to start. I found it very digestible, and I mentioned that before, but I continue to be able to follow the narrative quite easily, and while it's very much of its time as far as some of the characters' naivety and just like ignorance and being like, put two and two together, come on, it's Carmilla, her name, the various meanings behind it, which I actually really loved. I thought it was quite creative for the time to put a certain kind of emphasis on her name, and how, I don't know, she finds herself popping up throughout history in different forms, just to give a little bit of a teaser for that. I found it a very cool perspective on vampirism, especially it being kind of the prototype for a lot of other classic works, modern day works, including Dracula. I am kind of annoyed now that Dracula is so much better known, because this book, let me backtrack. I haven't actually read Dracula. I've never been interested in reading Dracula, and I probably wouldn't have really picked up this book on my own either. So 2 for 2 by Lauren, who's, making me go out of my comfort zone. This one definitely worked out because, yeah, I found it really fascinating. I really appreciated it. I'm sure that my rating isn't going to reflect that, though. Just so everyone knows, when it comes to classics, I don't think I've ever really given a true classic 5 stars, just because it's not the area that I'm into. But I really liked all of the elements that were going on here. The discussions of potentially, I don't know, a critique on sexuality, women's sexuality, powerful women being something to fear. And I know that there are some criticisms in the back of the book that discuss how this could actually be a reflection on anxiety in like Anglo-Irish history. I don't know, maybe, but I don't really care about that. I actually prefer the suggestion that Carmilla as a character is complex because of what she represents as far as, like proto-feminism and the movement of that. I don't know if I'm making any sense as far as my thoughts about this, but I found it really cool. The ending was predictable in a way that like Frankenstein's predictable, those types of classic Gothic tales. The tension is because you see a certain demise coming. You see a certain kind of melancholy and depression after all of these events. And I'm into it. So this was really fun. I think I'm probably going to range somewhere between definitely higher than a 3-star, but not a 5-star for me either. I'm going to have to ruminate. I think that's kind of what I've gotten into these days, is not being too hasty as far as my ratings go. Unless it's a clear 5-star, then that's really easy for me. But ever since I did 1/4-star ratings, it's taken me a lot longer to really narrow down and feel good about it. It's giving me 4-star range, whether it's a little bit lower or a little bit higher, but that is excellent. So oh my gosh, the immediate relief that I'm feeling. I'm sure you're all feeling relief too, because after Monstrilio, none of us knew what was going to be coming next. So that is awesome, and that's a great segue into my final read, which is the one that I have the highest expectations for. I'm really excited about it. I think it has a great premise. It's the most modern kind of book that I'm reading. I know Monstrilio is also modern, but it also gives kind of Gothic, a bit oddity absurdity that gives me 20th century writing style. I don't know if I'm making any sense there, but I feel as though I'm gonna vibe the most with Goddess of Filth. So what are we waiting for? Let's get going on this final book for the vlog! I am 55 pages into Goddess of Filth, and this book is flying by. I'm about 40% into it. That's how short this book actually is, and I have to say that I'm really impressed with the pacing of this narrative. Because it's so short, every single scene has to have impact. It has to be purposeful. There can't be any superfluous sentences, and V. Castro is making every character, every scene count. I think I'm going to finish this in a day. I just started it, and I'm really invested. I'm having a good time with these young women in their society. They're all Latinx, and they just graduated high school. We're seeing some flashbacks as far as their time growing up, their interactions with friends, with peers, with family before and after the seance. So when they take part in this seance, one of their friends ends up becoming possessed by this very ancient, old, powerful being, and she seems to be this woman figure, and I'm not really sure much about her. No one else does, so I'm interested to see if we really learn the origin of this creature, of this being or not. Is she a spirit? Is she a god? I don't know, but I'm having a really good time with learning about Fernanda, specifically the victim of this possession, who she was before the possession, and what this god or being is leading her to be afterwards. We're also seeing it from the perspective of some of her friends, specifically Lourdes, and I really like Lourdes. She is a bit of an edgier character. She is almost the literary foil to Fernanda pre her possession, because Fernanda is well behaved, she comes from a good family, she gets good grades, she's got this bright future and a scholarship, she's shy, whereas Lourdes has a bit of a mouth on her. She is ready to defend herself and others and being fierce, and she also is definitely judged by the community, specifically because she comes from poverty, because she is deemed this promiscuous young woman. And it's also a very strongly religious community, making sense because we're in a Latinx community in Texas. And I really like the juxtaposition between having these two perspectives and having them juggle the pressures on very two different sides of the spectrum of living within it. I'm having a really good time. I'm interested to see what happens. Things are escalating very quickly, and it seems as though the community is very certain that Fernanda is being possessed by this demon. I am of the opinion that she's not, And I actually think that this possession might be good for her. Is that weird? I don't really know if it's going to be good for her in the end. I don't really know if she's gonna survive this. I don't know who's gonna survive this, but I do think our author is providing some really great social commentary on the pressures of women, specifically Latinx women within and outside of their community, how they're judged, how there is prejudice and higher expectations for them to be accountable, for them to protect themselves in a world that chooses not to protect them. I'm having a really great time. Oh my gosh, I think we got a winner here and I'm really pumped about it. I finished Goddess of Filth, and this is hands down my runaway favorite amongst the 3 that I read for this vlog. So thank you so much, Lauren at Happy Haunts Library, for bringing this book into my life. I really enjoyed it. I found it fascinating that we were following these modern Latinx women as they navigated the world that was not built for them to succeed, for them to be able to trust in themselves and not fear judgment on all forms. It was so good, and it was really unexpected. There were certain twists, especially escalations in the last couple chapters of this novel that I was captivated. I had to figure out how things were going to result into, I don't know, maybe a happy ending, maybe a somber ending, and just horror, and I didn't know what was going to happen next or who was going to survive, and it was really fascinating. I really liked the social commentary. I appreciated V. Castro's voice, the voice that she gave to Lourdes and Fernanda and the other women in this novel, and how she was juggling the discussions of spirituality, of religion, both the very old and ancient, and then those that are newer forms that are dominant today, how it can be healthy in practice and extremely unhealthy in practice, depending on the moderation and the viewpoint you had. I really loved it. I loved the criticisms on modern day Christianity as well. And there were some elements toward the end that I wanted something slightly different. And by the slight changes, I mean, as far as resolution, like certain events that happened to certain characters, I would have liked them to be either better or worse, depending on which character we were talking about. But it's a really quick read. Genuinely, the audiobook I think is supposedly like 4 hours long, and this is honestly, like, look how tiny this book is. It's like smaller than my head. So you can definitely give it a chance. I really love it. I love the details of like the spine on the book that I just noticed, and honestly, this was really fun. I'm really glad that I was able to read this for this vlog, because I'm definitely going to be recommending it to a lot of other people. Cool! Woohoo! Okay, so we have successfully completed this vlog. I read Monstrilio, Carmilla, and Goddess of Filth, and also my lunch is ready. So I have nourished my body. I have a second cup of coffee here in the wings, and I'm really glad that episode 3, Meet the Booktuber Through Books, was able to highlight Happy Haunts Library, because Lauren is such a great person and she's got so many great things happening on her channel. In fact, today, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the books that she had me read. Monstrilio, as you know, I was not a fan of it, and I have decided to give it 1 star. I am so sorry, Lauren. It just wasn't a book for me. I had a lot of issues with it, as I've already kind of extrapolated, and I think it unfortunately helped that a coworker of mine at the library read it at the same time, and she also had a lot of issues with it. So both of us were fueling the fire, and yeah, this is a definite 1 star for me. But I'm glad that we started off the vlog with it, because things just got better from there. Then I ended up giving Carmilla, probably the underdog, the book that I thought I was going to like the least, 3.75 stars. I really appreciate how much influence it has placed on the genre of supernatural, paranormal, vampiric books. The fact that the original story features women, a sapphic kind of romance, or I don't know, obsession that goes on. I was really intrigued by it. While I still find classics not to be my cup of tea, they are kind of slower in narrative than I'd like. I definitely can respect it, especially the Gothic atmospheric tension throughout this book. So yeah, 3.75. And then finally, I have the Lady of the Hour, Goddess of Filth. She is getting 4.5 stars. This was really fun. It was really fast paced. I was invested in the 2 young women, especially Fernanda and Lourdes. I really like it, and I'm really happy that Lauren recommended this book to me, a book that I had never heard of. I had recently heard of Carmilla before. I was semi-familiar with it, and of course Monstrilio has been on everyone's tongues for quite a bit of time, but Goddess of Filth, this one, I didn't even know it existed. And so I'm so appreciative, because there's no way I would have thought to pick it up since I didn't know it had been written. And that speaks to the fact that all three of these books at my current library, my library system, we didn't have any of these books on our shelves. I had to request through ILL, interlibrary loan, to get these books into my possession, meaning that because my area didn't have it, we had to send out a beacon to all libraries across my state to see if any of them would be willing to let me borrow these for maybe a few weeks, a couple months, and I was really lucky to get all of them very quickly. So that's just, it's a program that blows my mind that I'm so appreciative of, because as I said, these books would not have been accessible to me, and that's likely would have added to the fact that I wouldn't have been motivated to read them myself without someone, you know, pushing me to do it. So thank you so much, Lauren, for letting me support my library, supporting that really important program, and for trying 3 books that are 100% out of my comfort zone. I think that you in this series are the first person to have really pushed the envelope and make me read 3 books that on paper people wouldn't think I should try, and look how it resulted. I did get a 1 star, but I also got such a great book that I'll definitely be recommending to so many people, including Carmilla. I could see myself recommending it because it's such a palatable classic, and yeah, like I find it really fascinating. So yes, this is definitely a successful 3rd episode. Thank you so much, Lauren, for again kind of being a bit of an experiment for me, letting me test the boundaries in the horror genre. And that in itself demonstrates to all of you who've gotten to the end that you should definitely subscribe to Lauren. She is such a lovely person. It's so funny how bubbly and excited she is as someone who is steeped in the horror genre, not just for books, but for like movies. In fact, actually, if I've planned this right, and I hope I have, because I really, really want to support this event in whatever way I can, I'm hoping that this has been published on the 24th of March on Sunday before 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because at that time, Lauren on her channel is going to be hosting a live event that talks about all things Frankenstein. It is for her retroactive horror book club, and I'm really excited about it. I don't think it's actually books. I think it's probably movies and everything else, but being a booktuber, I had to throw in the word book. So please don't let that stop you, because I'm sure they're going to talk about all of the various depictions of Frankenstein and just monsters in general across film. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a live event, 12 p.m. So as this video wraps up, please, please, please go check it out. I'll see if I can either redirect you myself or just have the link below for you to go. And yeah, have fun with Lauren, because I know it's going to be a great time. And now we turn our sights onto episode 4. Who is going to be my 4th guest for Meet the Booktuber Through Book series? Well, I've already selected her. More so, she's already kindly agreed and given me 3 books that I'm really looking forward to. Along the same vein as Lauren, I'm going to be pushed a little bit out of my comfort zone. There are some titles within this list of 3 that I already have heard of that I'm looking forward to try. And then there's one outlier that I actually don't know anything about, and that adds to the mystique of it all. The guest that I'm talking about is XO Jo. Joanna is such a sweet person. I'm really looking forward to reading these 3 books and introducing you to her channel. She's one of the first people that I actually connected with on this site. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to being able to showcase her and her channel and her ideas and everything like that. Anyways, I'm gushing. But the 3 books that I'll be reading for next month, just to kind of get you excited about it, include The Sunbearer Trials by Aidan Thomas, The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, and The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Walton. That 3rd one I'd never heard of, but the cover is gorgeous. Meanwhile, the other 2 I've definitely had my eye on. Because they're fantasy, they're a bit out of my comfort zone. At least I think they're fantasy. I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but I'm really excited. So if that intrigues you, then stay tuned, because next month I'm going to be reading those 3 books, and we'll have a 4th episode for you all to enjoy, and a 4th booktuber for you to subscribe to. All right, thank you so much for getting to the very end. I know that these vlogs tend to be quite long because I'm quite chatty, but also I can't help but gush about the books and talk about them thoroughly because my friends have been recommending them to me. With that said, consider subscribing not only to me, but again to Lauren from Happy Haunts Library, as well as potentially XO Jo if you're already excited about her recommendations, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!